August 24th, 1993, 12:22 a.m. The death chamber at Huntsville Prison lies silent, sterile under harsh fluorescent lights. Outside, the humid Texas night presses against barred windows like an unwelcome guest. The air conditioning hums its mechanical lullaby. Inside, the machinery of death awaits with cold precision. Tonight, the state of Texas will execute a 26-year-old man who has maintained his innocence for 9 long years. His name is Ruben Cantu, and his story will haunt the criminal justice system for decades to come. The clock on the wall ticks with merciless consistency. Each second brings us closer to a moment that cannot be undone. Each tick echoes through corridors that have witnessed too many final walks, too many last words, too many irreversible mistakes. This is not just the story of one man's death. It is the story of a system's failure, a tale of rushed justice, ignored evidence, and a teenager whose life was forfeit before he truly had a chance to live it. Ruben Cantu, born into the grinding poverty of San Antonio's West Side, Hispanic in a system that too often saw color before humanity. A product of broken streets and broken dreams, where survival meant learning to be hard before you learned to be hopeful. But Ruben was different. Small for his age, quiet, thoughtful. While other kids ran with gangs, he preferred solitude, books over bullets, words over weapons. His mother, Aurelia, worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table and hope alive in her children's hearts. November 8th, 1984. A date that would shatter 2 families and expose the fault lines in American justice. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Shots fired at a house on Briggs Street. When police arrived, they found a scene of violence that would set in motion a chain of events leading to Texas's death chamber. Pedro Gomez lay dying, his life ebbing away on a cold concrete floor. Juan Moreno writhed in agony, wounded but alive. A robbery gone catastrophically wrong, 2 lives forever altered, and somewhere in the darkness, a killer had vanished into the night. The investigation was swift. Too swift, critics would later argue. Pressure mounted from the community, from the media, from politicians demanding answers. In such an atmosphere, thoroughness often becomes the casualty of urgency. Juan Moreno, traumatized and struggling to remember through pain and medication, was shown a photo lineup. His finger trembled as it pointed to a face. A 17-year-old boy named Ruben Cantu. That's him, Moreno testified, though he later admitted the conditions were far from ideal. The lighting had been poor. He'd been drinking. The trauma was immense. Fear clouded memory. But his identification would seal Ruben's fate with the finality of a coffin nail. The trial was a masterclass in how justice can go wrong. Ruben's court-appointed attorney was inexperienced in capital cases. Crucial witnesses who could have provided an alibi were never called. Evidence that might have cast doubt on the state's case was never presented. Ruben sat in that courtroom, a teenager facing the ultimate punishment, watching his life slip away with each passing hour of testimony. His dark eyes held a mixture of confusion and defiance. How had he ended up here? How had his life taken such a devastating turn? "I didn't do it," he told anyone who would listen, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "I wasn't even there. I was in Waco with friends." His alibi was solid, he insisted. But in a system hungry for swift justice, his pleas fell on deaf ears like rain on parched ground. The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, their verdict was as final as it was devastating. Guilty of capital murder. Death by lethal injection. Ruben's mother collapsed in the gallery. Her baby, her boy, condemned to die before he'd truly begun to live. The judge's gavel fell like thunder, sealing not just Ruben's fate, but embedding a question mark in the heart of Texas justice that would fester for decades. Death row at Huntsville is a place where time moves differently. Days bleed into nights. Seasons change beyond the walls, while inside, Life remains suspended in amber, not quite living, not quite dead. For 9 years, Ruben Cantu occupied cell number 47, 6 feet by 10 feet of concrete and steel. His entire world reduced to a space smaller than most bathrooms, a cot, a toilet, a small desk, and endless hours to contemplate the injustice he believed had placed him there. He read voraciously, philosophy, history, law books borrowed from the prison library. If he was going to die for a crime he didn't commit, he was determined to understand how the system had failed him so completely. Letters poured in from supporters who believed in his innocence, activists, lawyers, religious groups, but also hate mail from those convinced of his guilt. The duality of his existence, simultaneously forgotten and notorious, invisible and infamous. His mother visited when she could afford the trip. Each visit was a small death in itself. Watching her boy grow into a man behind bars, seeing hope fade from his eyes like light from a dying bulb. She never stopped believing in his innocence. She never stopped fighting for his life. Appeals were filed and denied with metronomic regularity. Each rejection was a door closing, a pathway to freedom sealed off. The legal system that had condemned him now seemed determined to see that condemnation through to its ultimate conclusion. Ruben watched other inmates come and go. Some earned commutations. Others walked the final 47 steps to the death chamber. Each execution was a reminder of his own mortality, a preview of coming attractions in the theater of the damned. But he never broke, never confessed to a crime he insisted he didn't commit. His lawyers begged him to consider it. A confession might lead to life in prison instead of death. But Ruben refused. "I won't lie to save my life," he told them. "The truth matters more than breathing." August 24th, 1993. The hours crawl by like wounded animals seeking shelter. Ruben spends his final day as he has spent so many others, reading, writing letters to his mother, praying to a God he hopes is listening. The chaplain visits. They speak of forgiveness, of peace, of what comes after the darkness falls. No family visits. His mother couldn't bear to watch her son die. Some burdens are too heavy for even the strongest hearts to carry. She remains at home in San Antonio, surrounded by photographs of the boy she remembers, trying to pretend this day will never come. At 6 p.m., he eats his last meal. Nothing elaborate, no grand finale to a life cut short. Prison meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, a small carton of milk. The same institutional food he's eaten for nearly a decade. He saves room for one final request. A simple piece of bubblegum. Something to remind him of childhood, of innocence, of a time before his world collapsed. The guards deny it. Prison regulations, no exceptions. Even small mercies are rationed in this place. 8 p.m. The execution team begins their preparations. They've done this dance before, the careful choreography of state-sanctioned death. Equipment is tested, procedures are reviewed. The machinery of justice grinds forward with bureaucratic precision. 10 p.m. Ruben's attorney makes one final call to the governor's office. A last-minute appeal for clemency, for mercy, for the kind of justice that considers doubt a reason to pause rather than proceed. The phone call is brief. The answer is final. No reprieve will come. 11:30 p.m. The witnesses gather in the sterile viewing room. Media representatives with notepads and cameras. State officials fulfilling their solemn duty. Members of Pedro Gomez's family, seeking closure they hope death will bring. Empty chairs where Ruben's supporters might have sat. His mother's absence is palpable. A ghost in the room, a testimony to love's limitations in the face of legal machinery. 11:45 p.m. The death warrant is read to Ruben in his cell. Legal language cold as winter stone. The formal notification that the state of Texas will take his life in 37 minutes. He listens in silence, his young face aged beyond his 26 years, by nearly a decade on death row. The words wash over him like rain on rock. He's heard them before in nightmares, rehearsed this moment in the theater of his mind. But the reality is both exactly as imagined and completely different. More final, more real, more irreversible. 11:47 p.m. Guards enter his cell for the final time. They are professional, almost gentle. These men have walked this path with dozens of condemned prisoners. They know the weight of these moments, the gravity of their role in this ancient ritual. Ruben stands without resistance. His hands are cuffed behind his back, the metal cool against his wrists. His legs are shackled, the chains creating a metallic rhythm as he begins the final journey of his life. The walk is short but eternal. 47 steps from death row to the gurney. Each step a small goodbye to the world of the living. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on concrete walls. The air smells of disinfectant and fear and something else. The indefinable scent of finality. Ruben moves with quiet dignity, his head held high despite the chains. No tears, no pleas. No desperate attempts to delay the inevitable. Just a young man facing death with more grace than many face life. Behind him, the door to his cell stands open for the first time in years. Empty now, waiting for the next condemned soul to fill its concrete embrace. The cycle continues. The system grinds forward. Justice, as the state defines it, marches on. 12:10 a.m., August 25th, 1993. The chamber door opens with a mechanical hiss. The room is smaller than most people imagine, almost intimate in its clinical efficiency. Stark white walls reflect the harsh fluorescent lighting. No windows to the outside world. No natural light to soften the artificial brightness. Just four walls, a ceiling, and the machinery of death waiting with patient malevolence. The gurney waits in the center like an altar for a sacrifice no god would want. Leather straps hang loose like sleeping serpents, ready to hold a man still while the state takes his life. An IV stand nearby, catches the light like a metallic crucifix. Tubes and needles prepared to deliver death with scientific precision. Ruben enters without resistance, his shackled feet shuffling across the polished linoleum. The guards are professional, efficient, almost reverent in their movements. They've done this before, we'll do it again. But each time carries its own weight, its own moral burden. They guide him to the gurney with surprising gentleness. These men, executioners by circumstance, still retain some thread of human compassion. They help him lie down, position his arms, speak in quiet voices as they prepare him for death. The leather straps are applied with methodical care, across his chest, securing his torso, around his arms, preventing any last-minute struggles, across his legs, ensuring stillness in his final moments. Each strap a small prison, each buckle another lock on the door to life. The fourth lines are inserted with professional competence. 2 lines, redundancy in the face of death. The needles slide into his veins, carrying the promise of oblivion. Ruben doesn't flinch. After 9 years of preparing for this moment, physical pain seems almost irrelevant. Through the thick glass that separates the living from the dying, witnesses watch in silence. Some pray, their lips moving in soundless supplications. Others simply stare, transfixed by the ritual unfolding before them. A few take notes, documenting death for public consumption. The weight of what's about to happen settles over the room like a shroud. This is the moment when abstract concepts, justice, punishment, retribution, become viscerally, irreversibly real. 12:20 a.m. The warden approaches with ceremonial gravity. He's presided over dozens of executions, yet each one requires him to ask the same question, fulfill the same obligation, to give the condemned one final moment to speak. The microphone crackles to life with electronic feedback. In the viewing room, witnesses lean forward. This is the moment many have waited for. Will he confess? Will he finally admit his guilt? Will he apologize to Pedro Gomez's family? Ruben Cantu, the warden's voice echoes in the small chamber. You have been sentenced to death by the state of Texas for the capital murder of Pedro Gomez. Do you have any last words? For a moment, Silence fills the chamber, like water filling a drowning man's lungs. Ruben's dark eyes stare at the ceiling, then move to the witnesses beyond the glass. Perhaps he sees Pedro's family. Perhaps he searches for a face that might believe in his innocence. When he speaks, his voice is steady, clear, carrying the weight of 9 years of maintained innocence, of appeals denied, of hope deferred, but never quite extinguished. No, sir. 2 words. His final statement to a world that would take his life for a crime he swore he didn't commit. Not a confession, not an apology, not even a plea for understanding. Just 2 words that somehow carry the weight of absolute defiance in the face of absolute power. 12:21 a.m. The executioner, hidden behind one-way glass, like some technological grim reaper, begins the sequence that will end Ruben Cantu's life. The first drug flows through the IV line like liquid nightfall. Sodium pentothal, the same anesthetic used in surgical procedures, now repurposed for death. Ruben's eyes flutter as consciousness begins to slip away. His breathing slows to a rhythm as ancient as humanity itself. The witnesses watch in fascination and horror as life ebbs from a young man's body with scientific precision. This is death sanitized, medicalized, stripped of its primal terror, and transformed into something resembling a medical procedure. Pavillon follows, a paralytic agent that stops voluntary muscle movement. Ruben's chest stops rising and falling. His body becomes still as stone, a living statue frozen in time. But his heart continues beating, pumping life through veins that carry death. Finally, potassium chloride, the killing stroke. It flows through his bloodstream like liquid lightning, stopping his heart with chemical efficiency. The steady beep of the heart monitor becomes erratic, then slower, then 12:22 a.m. After 37 minutes of choreographed death, Ruben Cantu is pronounced dead by the attending physician, the 5th juvenile offender, executed by Texas since the death penalty was reinstated. A statistic that will haunt this case forever. A number that represents not just one life lost, but faith lost in a system that promised justice and may have delivered only vengeance. In the viewing room, witnesses sit in stunned silence. Some cry. Others sit stone-faced, justice served in their eyes. Pedro Gomez's family embraces, hoping that death will bring them the peace that life could not provide. The gurney that held Ruben's body is wheeled away, leaving behind only an empty room and the lingering question that will haunt Texas justice for decades to come. Did we just execute an innocent man? But death was not the end of Ruben's story. In many ways, it was just the beginning of a more troubling chapter in the annals of American justice. Years passed. The case file gathered dust in archive boxes. Pedro Gomez remained dead. Juan Moreno carried his trauma and his testimony into the shadows of memory. The wheels of justice ground forward, processing new cases, new defendants, new sentences. But truth, like water, has a way of finding cracks in even the strongest foundations. In 2005, 12 years after Ruben's execution, the Houston Chronicle published an investigation that would shake the foundations of Texas justice and raise questions that demanded answers from the very heart of the criminal justice system. Juan Moreno, the star witness whose testimony had sealed Ruben's fate, came forward with a confession that shattered everything. He recanted his identification, claiming that police coercion and pressure had influenced his testimony. The man whose words had sent Ruben to death row was now admitting he might have been wrong. But that was just the beginning. David Garza, Ruben's alleged accomplice who had avoided the death penalty by cooperating with authorities, finally broke his silence after decades of guilt, eating away at his conscience like acid. In a stunning revelation, Garza admitted that Ruben wasn't his partner in the robbery that night. Someone else had been the second gunman, someone whose identity Garza had kept secret to protect himself and his family from retaliation. The truth was emerging like a photograph, developing in chemical solution, each detail becoming clearer and more damning to the system that had rushed to judgment. Perhaps most devastating of all was the admission by Sam Millsap, the district attorney who had prosecuted Ruben's case with the full confidence of righteousness. The former prosecutor, once a lifelong supporter of capital punishment, publicly declared his opposition to the death penalty. The reason?
Ruben Cantu, in the latter part of 2004, became one of 3 or 4 poster children, for lack of a better term, in the national innocence debate. When I was confronted with the results of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund's investigation by a reporter from the Houston Chronicle who had done an incredible amount of work on the Cantu case, good work on the Cantu case. Lisa Olson is her name, and she's a respected investigative reporter. She told me what the Chronicle's conclusion was, and that was that Cantu was innocent. Asked me what.
The growing certainty that his office had executed an innocent man. The system failed, Millsap would later say. And when the system fails in a capital case, there's no going back. There's no way to resurrect the dead. The evidence mounted like storm clouds on a clear day. Witnesses who could have provided Ruben an alibi were never called to testify. His inexperienced defense attorney had failed to present crucial evidence that might have saved his life. The rush to solve a brutal murder had created tunnel vision that focused on a convenient suspect while potentially allowing the real killer to escape justice. Ruben had been the perfect scapegoat, young, Hispanic, poor, with a minor criminal record that made him an easy target for a system under pressure to deliver swift justice. His protests of innocence were dismissed as the desperate lies of a guilty man, when they may have been the desperate truths of an innocent boy caught in a web of circumstantial evidence and prosecutorial ambition. Too late for Ruben, but not too late for the truth to emerge and demand accountability from a system that had failed in the most fundamental way possible. August 24th, 1993. A young man died strapped to a gurney in a sterile room in Huntsville, Texas, maintaining his innocence to the very end. The machinery of justice had spoken with the finality of thunder. The case was closed. The sentence carried out. The system had functioned exactly as designed. But justice, it seems, is not always just, and closure is not always based on truth. In the years since Ruben's execution, DNA evidence has exonerated hundreds of wrongly convicted individuals across America. The Innocence Project estimates that at least 4% of death row inmates are innocent, a statistic that should terrify anyone who believes in the sanctity of life and the fallibility of human institutions. How many Ruben Cantus have paid the ultimate price for crimes they didn't commit? How many families have grieved not just for victims of violence, but for the victims of a flawed system that sometimes values the appearance of justice over the reality of truth? These are the questions that should keep us awake at night, staring at ceilings and wondering how many irreversible mistakes we've made in the name of justice. Questions more haunting than any ghost story, more chilling than any thriller because they're real. They represent real lives lost, real families destroyed, real faith shattered in institutions we depend on to protect the innocent while punishing the guilty. Somewhere, in the silence of that death chamber in Huntsville, the truth waits. It waited while Ruben breathed his last breath. It waited while his body was wheeled away. It waited while evidence emerged and witnesses recanted and prosecutors expressed doubt. And it demands to be heard. It demands that we confront the uncomfortable possibility that our system of justice, for all its safeguards and appeals and careful procedures, sometimes gets it catastrophically wrong. It demands that we remember Ruben Cantu not as a statistic or a case number, but as a young man who may have died for someone else's crime, whose final words were a quiet refusal to confess to something he didn't do. The truth waits, and it will not be silenced by death. Ruben Cantu's story raises a fundamental question. How can we accept the death penalty when serious doubts remain about a convict's guilt? His execution remains a heavy controversy and a harsh reminder that the justice system is not infallible. What do you think? Share your thoughts and let's discuss.